So, very first time doing a live Facebook, and thanks here to Maestro Donato Cabrera, who very gently persuaded me, and I'm so grateful because uh, it's wonderful. I think it's gonna be a nice way to reach to more people. So, thank you so much for your time. This is Maestro Donato Cabrera, music director of California Symphony and Las Vegas Philharmonic. I'm really grateful that you agreed to do this, and we're going to have a fun conversation here talking about all sorts of things related to conducting and the conducting world.
Including Facebook Live and all of its wonderful technological challenges.
Indeed, all the hurdles we have to jump through.
Thank you, Christian, so much for welcoming me to this interview. Hello to all of your orchestra members at UC Davis and to anyone else who's watching. And when you reached out to me the other day, I was so excited because, like you mentioned when we were talking earlier, it's really not common that conductors have the chance to just sit down and talk to one another. You know, we've known each other for many years, but only really in passing. And so I was so really looking forward to this.
It is very, very true. And, I'm excited to be able to ask you so many questions and likewise, make it a two-way road that we can ask each other all sorts of things. So maybe the conducting profession, and this is related to the first question that I'm going to ask you about being in quarantine and how you deal with this and all of that. But it's related to the fact that the conducting profession sometimes gets so busy, and I know for some of the things you told me before we even started the interview, maybe this is related to the fact that conductors don't get to talk to each other so much. You invite a conductor to conduct in your orchestra, but somehow you're somewhere else conducting. So how are you approaching this whole scenario right now of shelter in place and not being able to perform publicly?
Well, the one of the interesting dichotomies of being a conductor is that you have to be able to shift from being a very private person, very similar to the life of a composer, in that you need a lot of quiet time, a lot of alone time. You have to be comfortable with many hours of being a hermit, basically, so you can prepare and study not only the music you're going to conduct, but the literature and the great works of art surrounding whatever pieces that you're working on. And this just takes a lot of quiet time. And so these last few weeks, I would imagine for most conductors, aren't unusual. But the other side of the coin for being a conductor is there couldn't be a more opposite world, in that you're then expected to be able to walk up in front of a group of eager, talented musicians and be a very outward person, the opposite of what you've just been doing in terms of studying and ingesting information, and be able to then share all the things you've been able to learn in a very convincing, charismatic, outgoing way for the rehearsals, these often 10 hours of rehearsals. And then you have to be comfortable, walk out on stage in front of thousands of people and put on a show, really. I mean, it's, in the end, the concert is sort of a celebration of all the hard work you've done during the rehearsals. So there is this dichotomy of incredibly private time and incredibly public time that a conductor, and most musicians really, have to be able to do well. So it just so happens that for me, these last few weeks, and for you and for everyone, I have very much welcomed these weeks of solitude. And it has given me the chance, which I've never had the chance before, and this is what we were talking about the other day, of having a chance to reflect on that other half of my career, of that very public persona. And and what is really necessary in order for me to remain true to myself, and what isn't. We've been able to, all of us around the world in this isolation have been given this opportunity for reflection. And what I am taking away from this right now is just a sense that what I really miss isn't necessarily the rehearsal process and the concertizing. It is this art form, this music that we so love. I haven't been able to share this with an audience, not in performing it necessarily, but just the offering of this music in a public context is what I've missed the most. Not rehearsals, not the actual the music part of it. So it is now streaming live on Facebook, I see.
I am so sorry that I was typing in the middle of your answer. I was listening, but I saw Facebook told me that the video had died, so I had to restart it. So
Aha, good. It's working. Excellent.
Now it seems to be working.
No, that's, again, this is all, it's now we can share it with the world. Here it is. I'm going to share it while you ask me, you respond to. Well, I mean, how have you been feeling in these last few weeks?
Well, it is, I really miss the side of the coin that you mentioned, which is the working with people, flipping that coin. I mean, the side of doing a lot of inward work is still here, obviously, and for that there is a lot more time than usual.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have also my hat as a composer that I've been wearing more of lately because there is more time.
Yeah,
but
you're very lucky to have to wear those hats, the composition hat as well.
I know they complement each other really well, and but I do miss, you know, the work with people that I really care about, and making music with them is such a wonderful, is such incredible comfort as well. It's incredible to share with the audience, but also to, when you build a relationship with musicians and you know this, you work with them, it's very different. You know, guest conducting is extremely exciting and beautiful for other reasons as well, but when you build a long-term relationship with an orchestra, it's also something extremely powerful, and I really miss that at the moment. But I wonder, related to this, so you're a music director of two orchestras, the California Symphony, the Las Vegas Philharmonic. How do you see your role with regards to programming? You know, I know you're an extremely curious person. You worry so much about so many things in society, about the different kinds of arts, and I am sure you see every community as something of its own. So how do you approach programming for various different ensembles?
Very good question, and it's something that I've had to learn on the job. When I first began working with both orchestras, I was convinced that it was solely from my perspective. In other words, that what I came up with in terms of programming, not only from concert to concert, but from season to season, would work no matter where I conducted and was music director, because I thought that was all that was needed. And that is, it's only half of the story, because the other half of the story is that every community's relationship to music and to an orchestra is just slightly different. The history of the California Symphony, in terms of its relation to all sorts of music, including new music, is entirely different than the relationship that the community has with the Las Vegas Philharmonic and the music that the Las Vegas Philharmonic performs. And therefore, for me, what I quickly realized in the first couple of seasons, programming for both orchestras simultaneously, is that, yes, I can maybe do the same piece with both orchestras, but I can't necessarily do the same program from orchestra to orchestra, and I can't necessarily do those pieces in the same year. Now, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. What's far more important, or as equally as important, I should say, is this other half of the story, in that these journeys that you're taking with the audience and the orchestra, you have to really fine tune that journey and be aware of the needs of the audience, of this particular flavor, the musical identity of these communities, and celebrate these musical identities. So for instance, for the Las Vegas Philharmonic, we are very lucky to be in a city that is famous for entertainment. Now, it's not necessarily classical music entertainment, but it has a rich tradition of especially the most famous American performers that the entire world knows have at one point or another been closely associated with Las Vegas. And because of that, there are many incredible musicians to this day that live in Las Vegas and perform in Las Vegas. And so, for instance, this last season, I did this concert called Very Vegas Showcase, where I featured these musicians. And yes, it was sort of a pops-like concert, but it was entirely unique music to Las Vegas. And only that concert could only happen in Las Vegas. And the majority of the people that came to that concert, or that normally come to the Las Vegas Philharmonic concert to see Brahms, Beethoven, etc., they all were so happy to see these artists who they normally see perhaps at a lounge or at a jazz club come and perform with their orchestra. And so this was a perfect example of something that, you know, as a music director, if you're going to a community, it's just to really understand the pulse, the musical pulse, the cultural pulse of that community, and to grow things from that, as opposed to, say, the California Symphony. Now, I came in with this amazing. I really had nothing to do with it. This what's called the Young American Composer in Residence, which is a very well-known residency program, 3-year residency program for a emerging composer. And many well-known American composers have started in this residency: Mason Bates, Christopher Theophanides, Kevin Putz, Pierre Jalbert, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was incumbent upon me to continue that incredible program. And because of this program has been in existence for so many years, the relationship of new pieces, of new sounds for the audience of the California Symphony is not foreign. It's not a scary prospect for them. They, in fact, are excited about it. Once a year, we premiere a brand new piece, and everyone's really excited to hear it. They may or may not like it, but they understand that doesn't matter. It's the process that matters. And so that is an example of something really particular to the California Symphony.
That's wonderful. And the fact that I'm sure over the years, many of the musicians themselves have realized the importance of such a program and how they've launched the beginnings of the careers of so many composers who are now, widely recognized. Mm-hmm. So that comes to the next question I was going to ask you, which is your relationship to new music, your relationship that you've built over the years with composers, living composers, and how do you go out and scout for new pieces that you'd like to feature?
Well, in the case of the Young American Composer in Residence program at California Symphony, every 3 years we announce that we're looking for a new person, and the response is always overwhelming. We get, I think this year we had 140 something applicants, and 3 years ago we had like 150 applicants. So it may not sound like a lot, but every applicant submits 3 pieces, 3 scores, 3 MP3 versions, and all of their accompanying material. But what we do, and it's so labor intensive, so I give so much kudos to the staff of the California Symphony. They completely make it all anonymous.
Wow.
So I don't know who, I don't even, at the first round, I don't even do the first round. Well, I'm somewhat engaged, but the current composer in residence does the first round. They have no idea who's applying. They don't see where they went to school. They don't see their names. They have no idea whether male or female, etc. And so they only go off of the what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and then from that I get the second round, which is usually around 60 or so, 60, 65 applicants. Same thing for me. In fact, it's completely anonymous through the entire procedure. Wow. And this has created a very unique, we're the only organization that does this, makes it completely anonymous. And it has, it's upset the apple cart in a good way. So from that point of view, I'm set in terms of finding a lot of new repertoire. For the Las Vegas Philharmonic, what I've done the last few years, well, especially last summer, I went to Cabrera Music Festival, and I just spent 2 or 3 days listening to rehearsals. There's nothing but new that's happening there for orchestra music. And because I've done that this coming season, which was just announced yesterday, I'm doing this wonderful piece by Melody Oetves called Sakara Bird, which I heard rehearsed last summer at the Cabrera Festival. So of course, composers also always send, not all the time, but I get submissions here and there. I always make it a point to listen to them, maybe not right away, but I will listen to them and I will respond. I think that's the least I can do, even if it's just to say, thank you for sending me your materials, because so often the composers don't hear anything.
Right.
And that's not right, in my opinion. Anyway, it's personally for me, it's my responsibility as a music director to be looking for new things. Otherwise, this art form becomes irrelevant. Yeah.
So the next thing I'd like to ask you about is some differences that exist as a conductor. For example, when you work as music director, you're working with your 2 orchestras, or when you travel as a guest conductor and you go sometimes repeatedly to one same orchestra, or sometimes very first time, your debut in a different country, whatever it might be. How do you see any differences in these experiences, and how do you look to inspire your players?
Yeah, it is entirely different to be a guest conductor, as you know. In some ways, it's really fun, because when you're there for that week, usually a week, sometimes less, your sole responsibility is music making. You don't have to worry about auditions. You don't have to worry about programming. You don't have to worry about staff meeting. You don't have to worry about anything, all the other things that you have to worry about as a music director. You're there solely to make music with these folks who you, like you just said, you may not have ever met before, or you see them every year or every other year. And so when all those other responsibilities are off your shoulders, I treat this like sort of like a fun, like substitute teacher, your favorite substitute teacher that comes in and gives you fun activities to do. And maybe you don't have to do that homework. I don't care, these sort of things. And so I've always really enjoyed guest conducting. The one thing that is different, because you don't have that responsibility. Often you're given the program, or you're given a good chunk of the program that's already decided for you by that music director that's invited you. So you're often told, like, for instance, I just conducted the orchestra in Guanajuato in Mexico, and I was told that I was going to be doing the Schumann piano concerto, and after the intermission, Beethoven's 7th Symphony, and to please provide an overture, which I did. And it's usually something like that. You have less control, which is, I love programming, so I miss that, but it's okay. It's fine. I'm happy to provide anything I can. So there is that taken away, but I love the challenge. I remember one of my first international conducting engagements. I was invited to conduct Madame Butterfly in Chile, in Concepcion. And I had never been to South America before. Even though I'm Mexican American, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, and so I was really worried that, oh, my Spanish isn't good enough, and they probably don't speak any English. It's going to be a disaster, and what am I going to do when I all these I was so nervous. I was so nervous. And do they say metales or brases? What do they? How do I address? Okay, I did. All of these things I started obsessing about, and I will tell you this, and I know that it'll make you laugh. The fact that I knew that with a Latin orchestra, that you just say buenos dias to an entire group, they will love you. Most conductors that come from North America, you don't say that normally to your orchestras here. You say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," or just "Good morning, everyone," or "Good afternoon, everyone," "Good evening." That sort of greeting, that public greeting, is really not as prominent in the United States, but it is kind of expected when you stand in front of a Latin orchestra. And they may understand, oh, he's a gringo, he's not going to say that. But when you do say it, just that simple thing, you have won over 50% of the orchestra just with that. And so anyway, I've grown to really love being put into these situations,
Wonderful. And this ties really neatly into the next question I was going to ask you. You just mentioned Butterfly. And I know when you first arrived in San Francisco, you were assisting at the opera, correct? So how do you see the differences between working in the symphony world versus in the opera house?
There are quite a few differences. First of all, one of the biggest differences is time scale. When you're working on an opera production, chances are it will be at least 4 weeks of rehearsal, often 6 weeks, before the performances begin. And so you're dealing with a piece of music. Of course, granted, operas are a lot longer than symphonies, but you're dealing with 3 or 4 hours of music over the course of weeks, sometimes months, as opposed to the symphonic world where you're just within 1 week of one program. Then you go on to the next program is another. It's week by week. And so the time scale is a lot different. It's entirely different. And so in that, also the biggest difference is the amount of conducting you do. So as the resident conductor at the San Francisco Opera, I would conduct at least 6 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Tired shoulders.
I have I will briefly tell this story. So my first assignment as the resident conductor was the world premiere of John Adams' opera, Dr. Atomic. And on top of that, the music director at the time, Donald Runnicles, was not going to be available for the first 2 weeks of rehearsal because he was conducting at the Edinburgh Festival, et cetera, et cetera. And so also at that time in 2005, there was no official dark day. There is now a dark day at the San Francisco Opera. It's always Mondays for all of the productions. But back then it was a rotating dark day. So every production had its own dark day. But that meant but I was the only conductor. So with the music staff, they rotate. There's usually 3 pianists per production, and the rehearsals are shared amongst those 3 pianists. But because the music director wasn't there at the time, I was the only one. And the director, Peter Sellers, said that, we're not going to have a dark day. We'll rotate everyone. But I couldn't rotate with myself. So I conducted 28, I think, straight days, 6 hours a day. And of course, I went in there as like, oh, this is my new job. I'm going to make a big impression. And I think by day 4, I couldn't turn my head to the right. And by day 5, I couldn't lift my arms anymore. And that taught me a great lesson. Those 28 days of conducting the world's greatest singers, working with some of the best pianists in the world, it taught me so much more than all of the education I've ever had in conducting. How to be effective, how to with minimal gestures. Working in an opera house is the best education for conductors by far, by far. You learn how to breathe, you learn how to phrase, you learn how to communicate with various aspects that aren't just musical but technical, and speaking to a stage director. I mean, all of these things inform you as a symphonic conductor. It's not the other way around. You take very little from the symphonic world into the opera house. It doesn't really, there aren't things that you can't learn only conducting a symphonic orchestra. However, it's the opposite. So anyway, I could go on forever.
How, you know, when you ask a conductor who is your favorite conductor, I think 95% of them will say Carlos Kleiber, and whose training came precisely in the opera house.
Absolutely.
And it's remarkable somehow that, I mean, both you and I have done quite a lot of opera, and we both work in other countries, but there seems to be quite a divide in the US, and you're either an orchestra conductor or an opera conductor. And I don't really know why that's the case. In Europe, it's a lot more unified, where, you know, you're just a conductor.
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of reasons why this happened. I think one of the main reasons is because opera only happened in the larger capitals of the United States. You know, and even then, big cities like Boston didn't have an opera tradition. New York, of course, did. Chicago did to a certain extent. San Francisco did. What did proliferate in the United States, and still does, are the many orchestras of various levels all around the country. And so that's one of the reasons. Just opera isn't as prevalent. You know, if you go to Europe, if you go to Germany, Italy, France, there's an opera house in every town. And so the opera house in Europe, that's the center of artistic activity, whether it's ballet, symphony, plays, and symphony concerts. That all happens at the opera house. At least it did, and it still does in the smaller communities. The bigger communities now have symphony halls, but that was our opera house was the nexus point for European music making, really, and still is. Here, it's different. It's not that. And so there is that one reason. Also, North America, American culture obsesses with specialization. If you want to, there's, there are just minuscule things you can specialize in. And the idea that you can specialize in choral conducting and specialize in symphonic conducting and specialize, that also doesn't really exist in Europe. You're a conductor. You should be able to do all of that. And you should be the best at all of those things. And here it's more like, no, you have to get this degree here for choral conducting and get da-da-da-da-da. And it's these avenues have been very set here.
You reminded me of a great book by a philosopher called José Ingenieros, that the title of the book is already about this, the La barbarie del especialismo, de la especialización. So how barbaric it is to be a specialist somehow.
Yes, absolutely. I need to read this book.
I'll send you a link. All right. So you've had so many different kinds of experiences throughout your extremely rich career in the opera house with wonderful symphony orchestras. So what are some really memorable experiences you'd like to share about working with soloists, working, at the music festival, assisting a great maestro, anything that comes to your mind, experiences that you think, gee, I don't think I've told anybody about this one. And
I'll share with you a funny one that I have told before to some folks. One of the first opportunities I got to conduct opera was when I was still in school. I was at the University of Illinois, and I was getting a master's degree in conducting. And one of the professors, voice professors, had a very small opera festival in Bavaria, and I mean small. And they would do these sort of cocktail operas. They were full operas, but they were done on a very small stage. And the pit consisted of a string quartet and 3 woodwind players and a keyboard player filling in all the other, missing parts. And I was lucky. I was 26 or something, and they needed a conductor for that summer. and I conducted, it was 10 performances of Barbara Seville, no, excuse me, 12 performances of Barbara Seville, triple cast, 8 performances of Rigoletto, and 4 performances of Tosca, all triple cast. It was just like insane on the super small stage. And for the premiere of Barbara Seville, the act 1 finale is the same music over and over again. Yum, bum, ba-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, ba-dum. It just goes on this sort of march, right? And there are many verses that the characters sing to this march. Well, the lead, Count Almaviva, he started off fine, but then he decided he acts, for whatever reason, he had this huge brain slip, and he skipped to the second time the march comes, which is a good 5 minutes of music at least, and staging and everything. Well, so on the music part, it was maybe that he went from here to like here on a page. But for me, and everybody in that my little small orchestra knew exactly what happened, and so they just went from here to here, and they were fine. We had practiced and rehearsed so much, they had no problem. But first of all, I thought, what is going to happen? I mean, everyone, like, this whole scene has been skipped, and it was fears. And for a conductor's score, to go from here to here on a music score is fine, but in a conductor's score, it was like this much of music. And so I was in the pit furiously going, and everyone in the orchestra looking at me, sort of like, what's going to happen next? So that was one of my first, and that taught me a great lesson in that opera, especially in opera, anything can happen. And it's just how you deal with those moments of memory slips, or the set not working, the door can't open on the set, or there are a variety of things in live theater that can just go awry, and it's just, you have to be able to just deal with that. Some of the great, I feel so blessed to have worked, especially as a younger conductor, to be an assistant to truly remarkable conductors. I remember when I was an assistant to James Conlon. I had just graduated from the Manhattan School of Music, and he took a liking to me. I had met him at the Aspen Music Festival, and he invited me at the time. And when I was first starting out, I knew about James Conlon, but I didn't really know much about him. He was at the time living in Paris. He was a music director of the Opéra de Paris. And he invited me. He said, if you can afford it, if you can get to Paris, you'll have carte blanche. You watch any rehearsals, come to any of my performances, feel free. And so I didn't have any money, but I got enough money to get a plane ticket to Paris and stay in this really cheap hotel. And I remember walking into the Bastille Opera House, into the side door, and meeting his personal assistant that worked there. And she said, "Who are you? He's never done this for anyone." She was sort of like shocked, and in a wonderful Parisian way, and and so for that week, I just remember feeling like I was floating, watching these rehearsals, brand new opera. I can't even remember now what it was, but then seeing performances of they did this fantastic production of Turandot that week. And so that's one of many stories. And then at the San Francisco Symphony, week in, week out, seeing the great conductors either work with the orchestra or it not quite working out, or when it doesn't work out, how do things get solved. I learned so much about how to rehearse from conductors like Semyon Bishkov and Charles Dutoit and Marek Janowski. Those conductors I truly loved. And of course, just being the sort of the right-hand person to, the America's greatest music director, Michael Tilson Thomas. Those 7 years I spent with him on tour around the world, and learning about just when we were just the two of us together in his room, whether it be be at the Davies Symphony Hall or somewhere else, Carnegie, and him just calmly, without everyone else there, calmly talking about what a certain story, working with Jascha Heifetz or Piatigorsky or Copland or Stravinsky. I am very blessed with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I want to be mindful of the time that is clicking here for a while, and maybe one last question that I'd like to ask you is your advice for young conductors, for somebody thinking about becoming a conductor, or anybody just starting out in their first steps in the profession. What would you say to them?
Well, if you're a young conductor, especially in the United States, learn another language without doubt. German, Italian, Spanish, of course, French, one of those. Just learn another language and get to that. And now it's harder in today's world right now to get to another country, but those countries, especially Germany, Italy, France, music is like baseball there. It's part of who they are and what they do, what they ingest. You know, and you go to any small town in Germany, and opera is a thing. People go out. I conducted last year at this small town in former Eastern Germany, Cottbus, and it was, the two performances were sold out. I mean, this was the town the size, I don't even know what would, it has like 600,000 people maybe, and every performance, whether it's ballet, whatever, it's sold out. That's what happens there. And it's nice to be in a culture where its music is like baseball. And so just to experience that is important for a young conductor, and to go to every rehearsal you can. Spend your time watching other conductors conduct. You have to do that. I will tell you this, and it's not, I'm not disparaging my colleagues who are still conducting, but when I was a music conducting student at Manhattan School of Music, I would go at 11 a.m. every Thursday. The great guest orchestras would have their one rehearsal in Carnegie Hall for that night. And if it was like Vienna Philharmonic, they would have 2 rehearsals, and then they would be there for 3 days or whatever. I would often be the only person watching Claudio Abbado in the Berlin Philharmonic, or Nicholas Arnoncourt and and Vienna Philharmonic, or Bernard Haitink and the Concertgebouw at the time. I would be the only conductor there, and I would think, where is everyone? You should be clamoring to get in, and so I can just tell you, be aggressive, be your best, be your own cheerleader, because no one else is going to do it for you.
I think that's fantastic advice. So jealous about all these wonderful rehearsals you might have seen in Carnegie.
Oh boy, I lived in New York during 9/11. I lived there from 2000 until 2006-ish. And the week after, 2 weeks after, the first concert that was going to open the Carnegie Hall season was Claudio Abbado with the Berlin Philharmonic. And they were going to do one program, and then because of what happened, they completely changed the program to all Beethoven. And they did the Beethoven Sixth, and on the first half, they did I think the Coriolan Overture, and then some Beethoven songs. And that morning rehearsal was so special, because it was some of the first music any of us in New York had witnessed. I mean, again, I think there were 2 other people at that rehearsal with me. And just at that point in Claudio Abbado's career, he had already gone through cancer, and he was just a living embodiment of music. And it was so special to see him work. And I remember I went backstage to meet with him in the green room, and I got on the elevator unknowingly at the same time that Maestro Abbado got on there. And he was a rather short man, but at the time, of course, very skinny, and he looked at me with his eyes and said, "You're a young conductor. What are you working on right now?" And he was just so like on fire. He had fire through his eyes. And I could barely speak. And I told him, I'm working on Beethoven's Seventh. He said, "Who are you studying with?" I said, "Oh, Maestro Zdeněk Makal." He said, "I knew Makal 40 years ago. you're very lucky. He's a very good conductor. And he said, yeah, come in with me to the green room. And we went over and we talked about Beethoven's Seventh. And I thought, wow, what an incredible gift. You know, he didn't have to even say hello to me, you know, but he was he was music on, like, just the Holy Ghost of music.
What an incredible story. My goodness. Donato, it's been wonderful to, you know, catch up with you, know what you're doing, and just, you know, hear your very insightful comments about so many different topics.
Anytime, Christian, and we should just continue carrying on with this conversation whenever we can, online or off. I'm happy to do that.
Next will be with a glass of wine or a beer, maybe.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, and stay well.
Thank you so much, Christian. You too. Take care. Bye.